Okay, so here we're going to use u-Substitution and a definite integral of the trig function. It's going to be cosine of 2x minus pi over 4 from 0 to pi over 2. Again, we're going to look at two options. So option 1 we said was to ignore the limits. Okay. Option 1 is to ignore the limits. So we're going to, if we do that, we're going to have the integral of cosine of 2x minus pi over 4 dx. Again, ignoring the limits. So let u equals 2x minus pi over 4 differentiate, and you get du dx is equal to 2. So du is equal to 2 dx, or du over 2 is equal to dx. So these are the important parts that we're going to carry forward to let us do the problem. Okay. Then this becomes the integral of cosine 2x minus pi over 4 is u, dx is du over 2. Okay. Now we're going to pull out that 1/2. Okay, so it's going to be 1/2 the integral of cosine u du, and the integral of cosine is sine, positive sine. So this is going to be 1/2 sine of u. Now normally we would put in the plus c here, but because we're going to reintroduce limits, let's not do that this time. So it's going to become 1/2 of the sine, now reintroduce the x, 2x minus pi over 4. And we're going to go, this time, now we've brought our x back, so let's bring back our limits as well, from 0 to pi over 2. Okay, so this is going to be 1/2 times the sine of 2 times pi over 2 minus pi over 4 minus 1/2 times the sine of 2 times 0 minus pi over 4. Okay, well, it's getting a little bit complicated now because that becomes 1/2 times the sine. 2 times pi over 2 is pi. Pi minus pi over 4 is 3 pi over 4 minus 1/2 times the sine of negative pi over 4. Okay, well, let's deal with these over here. So 1/2 the sine of 3 pi over 4. So 3 pi over 4 is here. That's pi over 2. And that's pi. The reference angle there is pi over 4. And sine is positive in the second quadrant. So sine of 3 pi over 4 is simply equal to sine of pi over 4, which is root 2 over 2. So this is going to be 1/2 times root 2 over 2 minus 1/2. Now, the sine of minus pi over 4, there's a couple of different ways of working on that, but probably the quickest way is if you know that sine of minus a is equal to minus the sine of a. That's one of the identities you'd have learned in pre-calculus. So sine of minus pi over 4 is minus the sine of pi over 4. So this is going to be root 2 over 4, over 4, minus 1/2 by minus root 2 over 2. So root 2 over 4, minus by minus is plus root 2 over 4, again, which is 2 root 2 over 4, or root 2 over 2. Okay, and that's our answer using the first method, wherein we ignore the limits altogether. And you can see, because of working out the sines of those angles, it becomes quite a difficult question. Okay, so that's the first way of doing these. We're now going to look at option 2, which is changing limits, and this is something you also have to be able to do. Okay, so changing limits. Okay, so to go back to the question, it was the integral from 0 to pi over 2 of cosine 2x minus pi over 4. Okay. Well, let's use the same substitution as above. Let u equals 2x minus pi over 4. We get du dx is equal to 2, so du is equal to 2 dx, and dx is equal to du over 2. Okay, so there's just some simple algebra and a little bit of differentiation as well. Now, this method requires us to change the limits, so let's do that now. And remember, this is what we use to change the limits. So u is equal to 2x minus pi over 4. Now, the top limit in terms of x was pi over 2, so xt is pi over 2. So therefore ut, the top limit in terms of u, would be 2 times pi over 2 minus pi over 4. Okay, sorry, there's just a little break in recording here, but this gives us pi minus pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 4. So ut is 3 pi over 4. That's the top limit in terms of u. xb, the bottom limit, was 0 in terms of x. So u bottom will be 2 times 0 minus pi over 4, which is just ub is equal to negative pi over 4. So these are our new limits as well. So now we have this situation. We had the integral from 0 to pi over 2 of cosine 2x minus pi over 4 dx is equal to the integral from minus pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4 of cosine of u, sorry, getting ahead of myself, cosine of u by du over 2, which is going to be 1/2 times the integral from negative pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4 of cosine of u du. That's going to give you 1/2 by sine of u from 3 pi over 4, sorry, from minus pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4. Now, please remember, if you've changed the limits, you don't go and put your x back in again. Okay, we've changed the limits. We don't need to put our x back in again. Okay, that's going to be 1/2 sine of 3 pi over 4 minus 1/2 sine of minus pi over 4. And that, if we look back to where we did this earlier, is exactly the same expression as we had up here, 1/2 sine 3 pi over 4 minus 1/2 sine negative pi over 4. We've done all that arithmetic before, and we know that the answer is root 2 over 2. Okay? So your final answer is root 2 over 2. Okay. Pretty long example, and it's involved, and it needs looking at and studying. But take your time with it. Take your time, especially with the trigonometry. If you haven't reviewed your trigonometry in a long time, that's going to be difficult for you. But you need to stick with it. This is something you need to be able to do. Okay, thank you for watching.